Okay, greetings, sports fans. Oh, wrong audience. Greetings, fans of advanced accounting. Here we go. This is from your textbook, so you're going to be able to go back and look at all this in infinite detail. But what I wanted to do is point out proper formatting and of doing these Chapter 4 consolidation worksheets, and at the same time maybe point out a couple interesting little shortcuts to getting to some of the numbers that are on here. I think the first thing I wanted to point out is that the column, which is unique to this textbook, not every textbook follows this approach, is this column called the non-controlling interest. And what they do here is they actually show the computations or the numbers for purposes of the non-controlling interest. For example, they have the non-controlling interest income, which gets moved here. They have the non-controlling interest amount of dividends, which gets added there, or subtracted there, I should say, gets subtracted. If you notice in the entries, what they're doing is they're doing the entries for purposes of getting rid of the investment account on the books of the parent company, but that only is at 80% in this problem. So since this is only of 80%, the result is that they're going to have to come up with the non-controlling interest beginning amount, which is here, but it doesn't account for the non-controlling interest share of income and dividends. That's the way these worksheets and these adjusting entries work. They take care of the non-controlling interest in the actual consolidation entries here, but this is only for the beginning non-controlling interest, the beginning amount. This ties into what we did in class last Wednesday, which is where we went through an acquisition date worksheet for a non-100% acquisition, where we proved that to make the entries work out for the acquisition date, we wound up needing this particular part of our worksheet and our entries to balance out down here, to make these columns balance. So again, in case you're not following 100%, let me make it clear by clearing the deck. Let's do this and start over again just for the purposes of emphasis. All the entries in here take into account, no matter what year we're doing, by the way. So it worked last week for purposes of our acquisition date, but it's even for purposes of today's discussion that all the entries that we're making according to the textbook work for any particular year, because what we're doing through the A entry and the S entry is the A entry is taking into account all the assets that have to be shown even after years of depreciation. So if you look at the textbook, you'll find in the A entry that the numbers take into account the depreciation already and amortization already been taken to give us our opening balances for this year. But since it's at 100%, we're going to need to balance it out. Since 80% comes out of the investment account on the A entry, take a look at the A entry in the textbook, 80% comes out for the A entry. It means we need the A entry also to balance. We need what's going to turn out to be the opening non-controlling interest, as you see here. So that's what helps balance the entry. But by doing it that way, it means that the other particular entries, other than the A or the S entry, again, the S entry takes into account the beginning retained earnings of the non-controlling interest, leaving us having to balance through the non-controlling interest beginning amount, which you see again here, which there's the S entry, there's the A entry, and so it proves out that that's how we balance. But since the A and the S entry are the only entries that take into account the non-controlling interest, it means that we're going to need this column here to take up the slack. What is the non-controlling interest share of income? What is the non-controlling interest share of dividends? And that's what goes here, and that's what balances out this line such that we wind up with the 60. Since the D entry only takes into account the controlling interest share of dividends, again, take a look at the D entry and you'll see that the way the D entry is done, it only takes into account the $40,000, whereas the A and the S entry take into account 100% of the assets, 100% of the equity accounts, leaving us with the ability to get the investment account to zero, which is what we did through the A and the S entry. We don't need the D entry to get the investment account to zero. We don't need the I entry to get the investment account to zero. We don't need the E entry to get the investment account to zero. It's already been done through the A and S, but that left over the fact that we've got non-controlling interest income and non-controlling interest dividends. In proper form, what they do is they show this as it has been computed through the A and the S entry, and that's correct. And then what the math should do, when you take the math into account, which would be this one and this one and this, and bring it all the way down, the math should prove out to give us the ending non-controlling interest, which would balance the balance sheet over here. And in this case, of course, since it's from the textbook, it does. And that's the proper formatting of these worksheets according to our textbook approach. I'm going to do a little bit more here and show you something kind of interesting, which many of you probably have already figured out. And that is, let's say you were having trouble balancing your entry, or let's say you've been given a problem where they don't give you enough to be able to figure out this number. Maybe you know this, maybe you know that, but you don't know this number. It's an unknown. But there is a way, when you're given as much information that's here, there is a way to figure out the ending non-controlling interest, and it's really very, very simple and very intuitive. Of course, to ask somebody like me to figure it out without having a student show it to me a couple years ago, that's a different story. But it is very intuitive, and that is, if you look at, and I'm kidding about that, if you take the investment in the Pawn Company, since this is on the equity method, it means this is taken into account the changes in the equity account according to the equity method, which takes into account all the kind of entries that we make here every year for the amortization. That's what I'm referring to, and it's already adjusting for the types of entries that we make outside of the subsidiaries books. That's what the equity method does. Think through that. If you're not following that, think through what the equity method does, or go back to chapter 1 and see how it takes it into account all the changes that we make in here as well. And then, and also the A entry to an extent, and the S entry, and the dividends entry, takes it all into account here. And since it does that, but at 80%, because that's the parent's percentage, if you take this number, watch this coolness here, really cool. Take this number, 852, divided by 80%, you'll get a number that makes no sense, because I did it wrong on my calculator. But if you do it right on your calculator, you'll get 1,065,000. 1,065,000. Try it at home. Take the investment of 852, divide it by 80% or 0.8, and you'll get 1,065,000. Now leave your calculator on and take the difference between these two numbers, and you're going to get what is the other part of the missing 80%. You're going to get the 20%. The 20% you get here is at the end of the year for the King Company. It's the end of the year after they made the adjustments for equity method in the current year. So since this is after adjustments for equity method, it means that the 852, or the difference between 852 and the 1,065,000, is the ending non-controlling interest, just like this is the ending investment account for King Company on its books. This is year end. So the difference between these two numbers happens to be 213,000, and looky here, that difference, that delta, there it is. So you can always compute what your ending non-controlling interest should be by this method when the equity method is done on the parent's books. You can always do that. Just like we learned before, I'm going to erase some ink here. Just like we learned before, if we want to know what the non-controlling interest share of income is when the parent is doing the equity method, it's simple. It's intuitive, it's simple, takes 64,000. The same thing as we just did with the investment account, 0.8. I'm going to do it on my calculator, you do it on yours, and I get $80,000. The difference between 80,000 and 64 is no accident that it's exactly the non-controlling interest share of income. What these shortcut methods are doing are allowing you to answer multiple choice questions or partial questions where they ask you this or they don't give you every information. So it allows you to fill in the blanks by understanding the relationship between these numbers. It also will help you with a worksheet if you're finding yourself not coming up with the right number, not balancing. You can go back and let's say you proved what this number is through the method I just showed through using the investment account. Then you say, okay, well, maybe I know this one and maybe I know this one, so do I now know what the opening non-controlling interest is? Yeah, I can just plug it in. So if you know enough, you can get the math to work out to plug in what you don't know, what you weren't able to finish up on the worksheet or for whatever other reason. So these are great tools to know about how the relationships work with these worksheets. All right, I'm going to send this out. If you got questions, let me know because we got till Wednesday to fill in any other blanks that you may have about how it should all work.